Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But now I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back John McDonnell. For, believe it or not, I don't know if you're aware of this, John, this is the 10th time you've been on this show. It is a record, and I'm not sure we've got a special... We were going to bake a special cake for him, weren't we? But sadly, something went wrong in the kitchen. But anyway, lovely to see you. You were a very rare Labour MP when the immigration acts were going through the Commons in 14 and 16. You voted against that legislation, didn't you, while the party abstained. Were you to be the next government, would you repeal those acts?
We'd certainly repeal a fair amount of the system that now exists, because we want one which is a sensible system that operates effectively. This issue about hostile environment, Owen put his finger on it, basically. Go back to that time. I represent where I live, a multicultural community on the edge of West London. We were one of those communities where those vans were touring around, urging people to go home. People have forgotten about it now, but during that period as well, this is how bad it got. I received a set of papers leaked to me by a civil servant that said the government was planning to to instruct head teachers to check on whether their pupils had the right immigration status, and if not, deny them access to schools. That's how bad it got. Now, that was all over the front pages of the newspapers. The government pulled back. But those are the sort of policies they were contemplating. It was an appalling environment that was created by the government, this hostile environment. And we've got to learn those lessons.
Do you think the Labour Party then didn't stand up enough to this? You know, broadly across the piece, there was this idea that the British people wanted a hostile environment.
I don't think that's true. When I spoke in Parliament, I said I don't think this does reflect the values of our country or the wishes of our people. In fact, it degrades Parliament even to consider it. That's what I said at the time. And I believe they've got to learn those lessons, because if you do try to create those sort of hostile environment, what will happen is there'll be injustices. So the one thing this country stands up for is justice and human rights. That's what we should always do, and that should be embedded in all our legislation.
But just to be clear, you're not talking about, for example, just a sort of wholesale amnesty for those who can't prove that they have a right to be here.
No, but what we've said is that you have to have a reasonable system. It's not reasonable if someone can turn up and say, here's the income tax returns I've had for the last 30 years, and you still don't accept that that person's lived here legally or contributed properly to the society. There has to be a reasonable interpretation. The point that was happening here, this was a political decision. There's no use blaming the officials. Theresa May castigated Labour ministers for saying that. These are political decisions. So therefore, ministers made the decisions, allowed it to happen, and therefore they are responsible.
Who do you, within government, hold personally responsible for, you know, what you see as a desperate failure?
I'm sorry, straightforwardly, who was the Home Secretary at the time? Theresa May. Who's the Home Secretary now? Amber Rudd. If we're going to restore any form of integrity to politics, you have to accept your responsibilities.
So, which of the two should resign, in your view?
Well, from my view, I'd like them both to go, but the Home Secretary...
Who are you calling?
Well, the Home Secretary, who's the Home Secretary now, should accept her responsibilities. And just as Theresa May, way back when we were in power, when Labour was in government, was calling for ministers to take their responsibilities and resign, I believe that Amber Rudd should go.
Now, you last week went into the city, where they don't all love you, to give a speech at Bloomberg. One of the things you said was you would, I think you were absolutely explicit about this, retain the independence of the Bank of England. But would you change any of the way that it operates? So there are people, for example, who would take the view that the mandate that it has isn't broad enough. Now, in America, the Federal Reserve has a responsibility to promote full employment. Would you not want the Bank of England to take on a responsibility of that sort?
We've discussed this before. We commissioned a report from Graham Turner, a city analyst, and he published the first draft in November. The second will be out at the end of May, beginning of June. We want to stimulate, this is why I went into the city as well, we want to stimulate a debate around the mandate itself.
Yeah.
I've raised before, I'm quite...
So is it possible that you would change the mandate so that, for example, employment might be something they would have to take into account?
I've raised this before, I think we discussed it before.
Yeah.
I'm quite attracted by the wider mandate that there is in America, but would retain Bank of England independence.
Sure.
That's why I want the broadest debate about the nature of that mandate. That's why I was engaging not just with the city, but with trade unions, with manufacturers, and with civil society overall.
And just to be clear, is it very likely that you will end up with a formal policy of a...
It is.
And will employment be the key other target, do you think?
I don't want to narrow the debate, or the parameters of the debate. That's one of the issues that's come up. There's been a whole range of other issues about how do we ensure long-term, stable, patient investment. What should that be included in the mandate? Those sorts of aspects, but we want an open debate. And I think the Bank of England's up for that as well.
Now, you're making a bit of a fuss about a leaked letter which BuzzFeed got hold of, an HMRC letter, which refers to the fact that a company called Lycos Mobile made a donation to made donations to the Tory party when explaining that the HMRC was not going to cooperate with a French investigation into alleged money laundering by Lycos Mobile. I mean, I've read the letter. You're saying this raises all sorts of really huge concerns, but it doesn't look as though HMRC is actually backing off because of political pressure.
Well, I'm amazed. I'm amazed you take it so lightly. Here we have...
I take it lightly. I don't want to take it...
Let me just take you through it. Here we have one of the largest donors to the Conservative Party, who've just had raids on their French offices, 19 people arrested, and now there's a full investigation about their money laundering, not just tax evasion or avoidance, money laundering. They approach HMRC, they ask for their cooperation on a similar raid here. They get a letter back which refers to this company being a large donor to the Conservative Party. Don't you find that extraordinary that the HMRC should refer to that at all?
Well, it's certainly unusual. I've never come across anything like it myself.
If that has influenced anyone at any decision, in any stage in the decision-making, that warrants an independent inquiry.
But a bit like the Bank of England, though, one of the reasons people think the HMRC works is it's very independent in the way that it operates. Do you think that independence is wrong?
Yes, it isn't independent as much as it should be. We've done a review of HMRC and a group of our independent experts. Professor Prem Seeker is the leading expert on this. He's looked at it and actually feels it's not sufficiently independent. Therefore, we recommend an independent supervisory board put together so that it is absolutely objectively independent in its decision-making and properly managed.
So an independent advisory board akin, to something like the MPC for interest rates?
Exactly. But appointed by government, as they all are, but making sure it has a clear mandate itself. At the moment...
Just to be clear, some would think that would mean that a Labour government would in some way be controlling HMRC.
No, quite the reverse. Well, you don't argue that in terms of the other boards that are appointed in that way by government. At the moment, we don't believe it is sufficiently independent, and here's an example of it.
Lovely to see you again, John. We're looking forward to the even more record-breaking 11th appearance